But over to you, Dr. Menon. Without taking much of anyone's time, I think I hand over the stage to you. We have already gone live, so you can start this comment. Thank you so much, and all the best.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mrityunjay. First of all, I would like to thank FICCI for inviting me to this session. And this is definitely circular economy is an extremely important subject, not just from the industry point of view or academic, but to every common man it resonates, especially in the current scenario when COVID-19 has put constraints on the current economic model. The pandemic has caused devastating consequence and has exposed the gains made by various SDG initiatives which have been working towards eliminating hunger, poverty, trying to enable good health and well-being across the globe. If we are not able to address these issues, there will be profound and lasting economical and social consequence. Future-proofing sustainability, recovery, and development has to be undertaken, and concepts like circular economy are going to play a very important role towards our success. I did kind of read this article where it says that it is estimated that in next 18 months, around 20 trillion USD will be invested in national recovery packages. The financial and the investment decisions will be defining our society and the environment for decades to come. So we are already seeing new normals leading to different ways. Just this conference, we would have all been meeting face to face, but this is now a virtual conference. It has its own drawback, but the great thing is that it's able to bring across eminent speakers like what you will be listening to in this session. Great speakers who are kind of thought leaders in their respective field and would be kind of sharing their thoughts with us. But having said this, it's extremely important for us to kind of look at what direction we are taking as we recover from this pandemic situation that we have. And the eminent speakers today will be sharing with us what are the different models, the way we could kind of start recovering, and what are the pluses and the minus points. So without kind of wasting any more time, I would be kind of requesting the speaker. I would like to invite Yogi to come and share her views. So Yogi leads the Circular Economy Circular Job Initiative, aiming to ensure a positive transition to circularity for work and workers. Her work focuses on research into labor market implications of circular economy, skills needs for circular transition, and inclusive employment opportunities for vulnerable groups in circular economy. And these kind of very well connect with what we need today, because these are some of the groups which have got significantly impacted in the current situation, and how can we take circular economy to them and make a difference. In her research, she has employed impacts assessment, scenario modeling, and supply chain analysis. So over to you, Yogi, for your thoughts.
Thank you so much, and thanks so much for having me here. Very happy to participate in this, may I say, highly relevant session in this conference. I have prepared a couple of slides, so if all goes well, you can see my screen now. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to take 2 seconds to introduce Circular Economy. So I'm here on behalf of Circular Economy. Circular Economy is a social enterprise. We're based in Amsterdam, and our mission is to accelerate the transition to the circular economy with practical and scalable solutions. Now, this is not news. We're at a circular economy symposium. So this slide is really just on the side. What we want to achieve with that circular economy is we're breaking that logic of what we've come to call a linear economy, where we kind of waste all value that we built along that supply chain. And in order to do that, we're actually introducing a complex system of circular strategies to capture that value, to retain that value, and to perhaps even increase that value throughout our supply chains. Now, as you can imagine, that type of system has a significant impact on the labor market and on our social systems and society around us. And that's one thing that I'd like to start this presentation with, just a couple of considerations as to what this means for jobs. Activities are changing, they're transforming. Some sectors will decline, some will grow. And that's why we started at Circle Economy the Circular Jobs Initiative. What we want to do is, we don't only want to achieve a circular economy, but what we want to achieve is a just and a fair and inclusive circular economy. So what we want to do with the Jobs Initiative, the Circular Jobs Initiative, is ensuring that that circular transition happens in a way that is positive for work and workers. Now, just a little bit of background, and this slide I included because quite often when we speak of circular economy and we're trying to convince somebody, we're trying to make the argument for circular economy, right? We'll always start with, it's going to save us resources, it's going to solve our resource problem. It also contributes to solving the climate problem. We're seeing reduced greenhouse gas emissions. And then thirdly, we may see positive impacts on the labor market. So let's look at that third element a little bit. And I like to call it a big fluffy promise of the circular economy, that job creating potential. Now, from some of the studies that have been done, we see indeed that the circular economy has a job creating potential. Now, it's nothing transformational. When we look at the net numbers, we're looking at somewhere between 0.5 and up to 3% growth of the labor market. That is in net numbers. That's not transformational. It's a small increase. However, what is transformational is all of the change that happens underneath that. And so the little graph that I included here on the right side is an estimation that was made for EU member states as to the change that we see per sector. So even though we only see, and in this study, it was 700,000 jobs by 2030 for all of the European Union, so a fairly small number considering the scale. Even though we see that fairly small number, we see huge changes on a sectoral level. So we see a massive increase in waste management and repair, and also in services. But we also see a couple of sectors suffering. And so it's with regards to that suffering that we really want to take a dive a little bit deeper. And so what we want to say with the circular economy is that we shouldn't shoot ourselves in the foot. We should kind of take a long, hard look at ourselves and be honest with what the impacts will be. Otherwise, the positive impacts won't necessarily automatically be realized. So there will be some reinforcing effects between different ambitions that we've set ourselves. And I've used the SDG framework on this slide, but there's also, of course, we can pour it in different goals and ambitions as well. But what I want to say is that there's some reinforcing elements, for example, the job creation potential, but also perhaps the increase in quality of job, but perhaps also the increase in meaningfulness of jobs, perhaps the increase in pay, but there's also trade-offs. And so what we want to ensure is that there's a careful balance and that we mitigate potentially negative effects. And that's what brings me to the rest of the slides that I wanted to talk you through, and also to one of what I hope will be a core concept in the discussion that follows. In that sense, that there is this one topic that we always had implicitly woven into the circular economy narrative without necessarily making it explicit. And so now the Corona crisis, when COVID-19 hit and all of us had to go in lockdown, suddenly it was there. It was resilience. The circular economy is going to increase the resilience of our economic and social system. And really what I want to do is take a little bit of a deeper look in that. And I added a question mark because I want to check, is that indeed the case? Is a circular economy a more resilient economy? In order to give a vocabulary for that, or in order to kind of have a framework for thinking and discussing that, I wanted to introduce this social ecological resilience. This is a way of thinking about resilience where human and natural systems are embedded and highly interconnected with one another. And I like to employ that in the circular economy context because we're very sure and very aware that our human systems are dependent on those natural systems. And what you see here are 7 pillars of social ecological resilience. And I'd like to talk you through all of them just to see how they positively or negatively affect circular economy and how the circular economy can positively or negatively affect social ecological resilience. So firstly, there's diversity and redundancy. There it's about the fact that we have elements in our system that can serve as an alternative, that we don't rely on the very one thing to solve our problem or to serve our need, because if that one thing falls away, then there's nothing left. So that's about diversity and redundancy. Secondly, it's about managing connectivity. Connectivity is a good thing on the one hand, because if we have strong network relationships based on trust and on mutual understanding, we can actually lean on those relationships to solve issues at hand. At the same time, if we're overly connected, then the system can become quite dense and quite static and not flexible enough anymore to then overcome a certain shock. We also need to manage slow variables and control feedbacks. And that's very important in the way that we monitor the performance of the circular economy. It's not only about those fast moving variables, but there's also slow moving variables. And you can have them in the natural environment and, for example, acidity levels of a water body, but you also have them in the social sphere. And there it's for example, about ethics or about a legal system. And they're slow variables because they come to fruition quite slowly. They're often dependent on a complex interaction of multiple elements, and that's why we call them slow. As societies, we tend to monitor fast variables. We also need to foster complex adaptive systems. And there it's about accepting complexity, embracing it, and then being able to be flexible and deal with unpredictable situations. And that will help us overcome a shock. We also want to encourage learning, and that one, I think it speaks for itself. As we build learning systems, we'll learn from our mistakes, we'll learn from what we do right, and we'll make better decisions as we go. We want to broaden participation, and that's about relevance of any kind of solution that we introduce. And lastly, promote polycentric governance, because there it's, and that one is fairly closely linked with participation actually, because really whatever measure we take, whatever strategy we want to pursue, we want to make sure that it solves the actual problem, that it also does so for the largest group possible. So it's really about assessing those collective costs and benefits. Now, all of that together then constitutes resilience. And then we come to the fact or to an understanding of resilience as the ability of a system to overcome a shock. And so what we want to know is, with the circular economy, will we increase our ability to overcome a crisis like the current one? Now let's see how these pillars of social ecological resilience link to circular economy trends. And this is an exercise we've done at Circular Economy, really looking at what are the trends within the circular economy that are somehow relevant to resilience, whether in a positive or a negative way, but somehow are connected. And so let's first look at the ones where we see potential trade-offs. The first one is resource efficiency. Now, when a circular economy is done right, we're following the waste hierarchy. And at the bottom of that hierarchy is recycling. And you saw it in the kind of this, we call it the snail diagram, but in the diagram that I showed before, the biggest loop was recycling. That's the one that goes the furthest back. So recycling is where we lose the most value, and it's the least desirable option. The most desirable option is not even reuse, but it's reduce. And so it's reducing the need for material. And we do that on the one hand in addressing our consumption patterns, but we also do that by continuously making our production processes more efficient. And that is where resource efficiency comes into play. Now, when we look at resource efficiency, actually what we're doing is we're cutting out redundancies from our system. And that's where we need to be careful, and where we need to find a balance between resilience and circularity. Because the less redundancies we have in a system, theoretically, the more circular we are, but also the less resilient and the more vulnerable to shocks we become. So that's one careful balance to find. And then there's a lack of sociological foundation. I already said that the big arguments for circular economy were mainly in the environmental corner, and then the job creation element kind of came on top of that. Now we see that because the circular economy has historically grown from the environmental sciences. So it originates in urban metabolism and industrial ecology in those schools of thought. And it's only afterwards that it's actually developed into a piece of systems thinking that would encompass other parts of society as well. And so suddenly we're thinking about issues like the labor market implications of the circular economy. Now that's really, really interesting, but at the same time, we see that circular economy thinking doesn't have those roots in social sciences. And so if I want to put it shortly and fairly bluntly, it's the human factor that is often missing. So what about the social sciences in the circular economy? And we see a potential trade-off there because we're not taking into account, for example, learning systems, whether formal through education or informal in the workflow in a household. We also see that a lot of slow variables are social variables, and we don't take them into account in a circular economy. What would be an interesting debate to ensue, though, is whether indeed it should be part of that. But that is a discussion to have. If social variables and social sciences should be part of the circular economy, then we need to address them with regards to resilience specifically. If they shouldn't be part of the circular economy, then we may need to think about changing our narrative or shifting our narrative about the circular economy, because then it's less of a societal system and more of a production system. But there's also, thankfully, there's also positively and mutually reinforcing dynamics. And there's more than the ones that I'm showing here, but these are the two that I really want to highlight. Firstly, the very, very strong positive correlation that we see is between diversity and redundancy and the circular economy. In the circular economy, it's all about rethinking our production system, localizing our production system, decentralizing and distributing it. Apologies there. And all of that results in a more diverse economy, especially on the regional level. So what we're hoping to move away from is the hyper specialization or the excessive specialization and the excessive globalization of supply chains, and really have that circular economy be a motor for local economies that will hence have to be more diverse. This is fantastic for building resilience, as I explained before, because you'll have alternative elements that can catch when another element falls. And then secondly, there's decentralization. And this relates indeed to diversity, as I explained just now, but it also relates to participation and polycentric governance. So if we have decentralized systems, if we work with decentralized or distributed systems, and there, if we want to make it very concrete, then we can think of utilities, right? If we think of decentralized energy systems, waste management systems, water management systems, there we see that they're not only less vulnerable to shocks because of that diversity, but we see that they're also more resilient and better able to develop an answer to those shocks because they will be governed with local knowledge and with local know-how. Very quickly to end, I wanted to introduce two examples. One is from the city of Quito, the capital of Ecuador, that introduced an urban resilience strategy in 2017. And there's a couple of elements that I want to get out of there, or that I want to highlight there, because they relate to the circular economy. And so we see how circular economy starts to really get interlinked with resilience already in practice, even though maybe it's not necessarily made specific just yet. So firstly, that urban resilience strategy really invests a lot in broadening citizen participation. And when it comes to circular economy, there's a couple of relevant elements there. For example, the eco-center pilots, where they localized, decentralized organic waste treatment and really had the authorities sit within the communities managing those. Another interesting process was that of urban farming, and so that's seeing increased success. And there it's about localizing your food supply chains, and that is, as you can imagine, very closely linked with those eco centers with organic waste treatment. Another thing that I find very interesting about that strategy is that they very much focused on monitoring those slow variables. So if we go back to the food system, one of the elements that they actually have in their monitoring framework included is the variable of food literacy and eating habits, which is a very interesting element to link to the circular economy as well. A last example, or a second example, is that of a textiles production company. It's called Pratiba Syntex, and what they have done in the past couple of years is they shifted entirely towards regenerative agriculture, and without necessarily promoting that as being the most resilient or being the most circular solution. There are a lot of connections again. So firstly, they're working in a fairly complex system because they're vertically integrating their supply chain of knitted textile products. But they're also very much diversifying their activities. So one of the important changes that they made is they went from monocropping to multi-cropping. So they went from farming cotton or from farming only cotton to farming cotton, but also non-cotton produce. So there's wheat, there's maize, etc. So that in turn has reduced their dependency on scarce resources. That has decoupled their production process from finite resources, because they'll also installed solar panels. They installed a dyeing system that requires 50% less water, and the water that they do use, they can recycle it infinitely. So we see a reduction on a reduced dependency on scarce resources. We see an increased diversification of activities on the firm level, but also of livelihood dependency on the farmer level. And we also see actually that when it comes to workers' involvement, is that they've been able to give more meaning to their work. They've been more involved in business processes, and they've actually learned a lot, and they've shifted their attitude to being learning workers as well. And so what I wanted to do with this presentation is really try and make concrete some of these connections between circular economy and resilience. And what I hope we can have in the coming hour as well is have that open conversation as to where there may be positive elements and where there may be negative elements, because there we want to actively steer to mitigate those. If there's any questions, of course, you can find my contact details on the slide. But for now, thanks so much, and looking forward to the discussion.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Yoki, for a wonderful presentation that you have kind of shared with us. It's amazing the way you have kind of looked at the environmental, social aspects, looking at its interdependency and relating it to circular economy to understand the resilience aspect. It is fabulous work that you have done. I would move forward in interest of time. What I would say is I would invite Mr. Viral to kind of share his thoughts. I do know we will be running a little late, so let's try and see if we could kind of make up on the time part of it. So Mr. Viral is a partner with a consultancy practice of Deloitte India. He leads the strategy, analytics and merger and acquisitions offering based out of Mumbai. In his role, Viral focuses on strategic clients of the firm to bring multidisciplinary solutions to the support strategic initiatives such as business and digital strategies. Viral also leads the sustainability and the social impact, enterprise transformation and operational improvement aspects within Deloitte. He brings significant experience in consultancy, and without spending more time, I would invite Viral to share his thoughts with us. Over to you, Viral.
Thank you, Dr. Menon, and thanks, Yoki, for a really exciting presentation earlier. I personally found the fast and slow-moving variables to be quite insightful and something that is definitely worthwhile for us to consider going forward. So, in preparation for this session, as I was thinking through, what are some of the the variables that at least we as consumers are impacted by. I actually looked at a bi-weekly survey that Deloitte has been conducting across consumers in 18 large markets worldwide, and I looked at India-specific data, and I'll explain why I did that, in just a moment. So, what are some of the highlights that I took away? Right. So, one is, through the COVID crisis, there is obviously an increased concern around mobility and financial consumption as well. which means that some of those are clearly sectors that have been impacted and so on. However, there's also been a greater focus and greater ability for consumers to consider buying, electronics, medicines, groceries, food, etc., online, right? And not surprising, but it's interesting. What I thought was really unusual, as a response, was that consumers in India, more surprising in India, is that they are looking at greater awareness and greater willingness to purchase brands that have responded well to the crisis, right? And also fairly open to locally sourced items, even if they cost a little bit more, right? Why is this so unique? And by the way, we've been doing this survey bi-weekly since April, and throughout that period, while there have been minor variations, it's largely been in the same ballpark, right? So it's 70, 60%, 65%, 70%, etc. throughout the last 6-7 months. I thought, we've traditionally held the view that Indian consumers are extremely price elastic, and that often drives buying behavior. But in these two areas, there were some very interesting unique outputs that came through, which in my mind points to the fact that consumers in developing markets are clearly more receptive to products and solutions that are more circular economy oriented. Similar views came from other studies that we've done. In a study late last year, I believe, which looked at developed and developing markets, US, UK, China, and Brazil, and said what are some of the top criteria consumers keep in mind when they look at purchasing decisions. Obviously, cost and quality were number 1 and number 2, as you might expect, but 3, 4, and 5 were interesting, right? And again, this is a combination of developed and developing markets. People care about how the company treats its own employees. People care about how the company treats the environment. People think about companies that support the local communities, right? So again, views from other markets. On the right-hand side of the slide, there's a study from Germany, which said that consumers are increasingly more willing to buy from local players, and they might even be willing to pay more. And this is overwhelmingly so, right? They are willing to pay more for companies that have had to raise their prices to be more socially responsible and environmentally responsible, right? So what is the key message here? The first and foremost is that we've obviously known that it's the right thing to do from an environmental perspective, but we now have validation from consumers that this is the right thing to do to resonate, well with our consumers. So it's good for the business anyways, right? So what we've known intuitively as the right thing to do is also good for business. So that's a takeaway that I pick up from these slides. Similar to the model that Yoki showed, and it's a slightly different view, but same broad messages, right? There are 7. We look at 7 different types of circular economy models, and they range from what we call cradle to cradle, take back and deposit systems management. You have repairs, refurbishment, remanufacturing, rematerialization, right? And different companies look at different ways to bring these about. These are not mutually exclusive. So a single company could have multiple models that they may have implemented in their operations. Famous examples: Puma, the German sports equipment and footwear company, I believe, has a brand called InCycle, where they believe that so they have take back and reverse logistics, and they believe that their overall footprint on that particular line of products is as high as 87%, right? So their footprint is reduced by 87% for that line of products. Apple similarly has both take back and and rematerialization, where they not just extract metals for batteries and minerals, but they will also give you discounts if you turn in your old Apple product. And as many of you may have seen in the announcement, just yesterday, that they are now going to discontinue, providing the power adapters and the wired earphones. Although they were a favorite of mine, they kept getting lost. But they'll reduce, some of that electronic waste generation, right, as a result. So, which is, it's a powerful signal coming from large, successful electronics companies, to suggest that this is really important to them, right? So, but here are some models that companies look at. Another important aspect to look at is from a company perspective is the progression from a model where companies looked at their own supply chains, their own surrounding ecosystem partners, but trying to maximize profits and profits only in what we call an ecosystem, which just meant focus on themselves, broadening that to what we are calling the ecosystem, which is truly trying to solve broader market issues, potentially in collaboration with their competitors and other ecosystem players, right? So, we obviously have heard Walmart and other large retailers trying to bring about co-opetition with their vendors, but this is an extension of that into truly trying to maximize the value from not just for the company themselves, but for the society as a whole, in trying to bringing about sustainable practices that benefit them, not just themselves, but the entire ecosystem. And obviously, in the two examples that Yoki mentioned, they are very well illustrated, right? Where a company looks at a wider ecosystem. So I just wanted to call that out as well. So for a company, what can a company do, right, to make it happen, in the backdrop of COVID and what we've gone through and what we are still going through? So what do we do now, right? So one is, a lot of large corporations and business leaders have pledged to say, look, we will build back better, right? So which means that our incremental growth they'll seek to make it more sustainable. We've had pledges coming through from many large global corporations to become carbon neutral by 2030. Some of the large oil and gas majors have announced carbon neutrality by 2050. By the way, Deloitte ourselves, we've announced that we'd like to become carbon neutral by 2030, not just by mitigating some of our footprint, but to the extent that offsets can come through community-driven, meaningful programs that actually allow us generation of carbon credits, right? So that's our approach as well, and I'm sure all of you have considered similar views, as you look at the future. But really, building back better is one key area. Second is, we believe that in the aftermath of COVID, and again, I don't mean to suggest that I see the end of the tunnel yet. We're still deep into the crisis, to be sure. But we believe that the contactless economy will likely see a significant growth, and that also represents opportunities for companies to bring about circular economy models. And what I mean by that is, contactless will mean that there'll be continued expansion of food delivery, online and digital-based models, and all around, requirement to make sure that health and sanitation are well taken care of. But there is also a downside, because shifting consumer behaviors, with regard to COVID-19, suggests that there'll be a significant increase in household waste, packaging waste as well, right? So there is, we are ordering, a lot more online, and that's creating a lot more packaging waste. Our transportation, is unfortunately going in the other direction, where instead of public transport, a lot more people are now using individual transport, which obviously is bad for the environment. So we are seeing a shift, and that is obviously creating has the potential to take us back several years, if not decades, in terms of our own emissions footprint. But this is where companies may have an opportunity if they, if they innovate around these models, innovate around these challenges, to not just serve themselves from a revenue and a profitability perspective, but deliver benefits that consumers are looking for, that will be sustainable for the environment. So I just want to leave all of you with that one key message, that as we look at as we look to the future, there is an opportunity to build back better with circular economy. I'll pause here and hand back to you, Dr. Menon.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Viral. A wonderful presentation. I especially like the model that you have shared around going from ego to eco, trying to bring in solutions to the market, which is so much needed in today's environment. And again, to bring in the proper eco solutions, driving innovation is absolutely essential. So very well said and very well covered. With this, what I will do is move to the next speaker. I would love to invite Professor Raghuram Tata. Professor is a chairperson of Father Arpe Center for Ecology and Sustainability, and Associate Professor of Strategic Management at Xavier School of Management, Jamshedpur. He has over 30 years of research, teaching and consulting experience in sustainability development. The last 17 years in corporate strategy aspects around sustainability domain. So Dr. Raghu is the first faculty member from any management institute in India to offer a full course of corporate sustainability since 2017. So over to you, Professor Raghu, for your speech. I think you are on mute. You are on mute, Professor Raghu.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Yes, it has come up now.
Yeah, thank you very much for a nice introductory words. This is a wonderful opportunity. Thank you, FICCI. I think this is very timely event that FICCI is organizing. I'm not. I'm just a plain limnologist and a wildlife biologist, trying to make sense of the purpose of business and purpose of life. Okay, that's what I would like to start with. Like climate change, COVID-19 is a human-made disaster. Okay, it's been waiting to happen, the way the globalized supply chains have worked, and how we have eaten up into the wild natural world, and how we reduce the distance between wild animals and humans is the consequence that we are facing today. And these zoonotic diseases, there are more to be expected into the future. And this sends out a wonderful opportunity for us. And that's what I call the COVID-19 is a force multiplier. It is not that the world did not have problems before COVID-19. Climate change was a science established or science acknowledged fact. And then COVID-19 happened, and sixth mass extinction of species, or we were humanity was testing the thresholds of the planet Earth on multiple fronts. Okay, I think this is the right time, and COVID in a way has exaggerated or aggravated the economic, social, and environmental problems that we have already been facing. Okay, what COVID directly will lead to is lower GDPs and disrupted global supply chains. We are all have witnessed them, and as a consequence, the SDGs might get pushed back. By how many years? Or will it be a few decades? We don't know exactly. But there is already an evidence of widespread job loss across the world. And World Bank's estimate says that around 265 million people in 2020 have lost their jobs. That means many people have moved back into poverty, and finding alternative employment opportunities might get delayed until we find solution for this pandemic. And forced migration and human rights violations. Children who are in schools are getting back into labor markets and trying to fend for life, and increased inequalities. Not everyone had equal access to healthcare before, but COVID-19 has really pushed those limits beyond many sections of the societies, and digital poverty that is quite widespread in the developing and underdeveloped countries. Not everyone can have access to internet, to have access to online classes and things like that. And climate investments might decline because the power industries are, as the GDPs and revenues of industries come down, there might be a rollback on climate commitments. And Paris climate goals, though they were not very ambitious in themselves, might become even more elusive. So is this a perfect storm that we are looking for, which will propel us to look at not this as a risk, but if you view this as an opportunity, what can we do about the environmental, social, and the governance? Will there be a churn? Because the ultimate objective is to achieve what we call as the absolute resource and impact decoupling. Now, we are facing issues on both the raw material side as well as on the sink side of the planet boundaries. So how do we manage all of this? So can we reorient our thinking, and can circular economy provide those opportunities is briefly what we'll be looking at. Okay. To move towards system thinking, there are multiple forces that are working from outside. One is the government policy, though from an economic side, we can say that they're not as ambitious they should be, but the political economy works in its own constraints and operative boundaries. And as Viral rightly pointed out, the customer preferences are changing and the stakeholder pressures are mounting. They are looking for more responsible organizations and behaviors. And companies are trying to address these issues through responsible leadership, where LCA-based or life cycle, the companies have started understanding the life cycle impacts of their products across the life cycles, and sustainable procurement and product process and business model innovations that have been happening. And the key for achieving, which will drive us towards a circular economy, will be the sustainable supply chain management, which Viral and others have. The reverse logistics are how do we close the loop to get the materials back, the waste back into the system. That's where the circularity or the concept of circular economy is very important. But if you really want to understand where the real barriers for circular economy might lie, is if we understand how nature functions. Nature, natural ecosystems are the longest surviving business enterprise, profit-making business enterprise, if you really want to call it that way. What nature will never run out of raw materials, and it is infinitely circular. Okay, it's been there for 4 billion years, and it is a research lab that is has perfected a system of closed loop system. Okay, and that does not mean that nature doesn't have diversity. Okay, nature is full of diversity. There are millions of species of all kinds and all varieties. Like the products that we have in the markets, nature has its products. Okay, and nature is perfect closed loop system. The problem is when on this perfectly closed loop system, when we embed this linear economic system, man-made linear system, we are testing the thresholds of the closed loop system as a provider of raw materials, as the source for the sink that the waste that we generate through our economic activity. Okay, but what lessons can we learn from this? What is the secret for nature's circularity? Is very simple. Out of it is the first principle is the material parsimony. In the sense that of all the materials that are there in the periodic table, nature works with 4 elements, that is hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, which consists of more than 90% of all life forms on this planet. This is a simplicity. So if you have simple materials, they are easy to disassemble or further degraded back into these 4 fundamental elements, and these 4 fundamental elements will again form raw materials for the next life forms. That is the simplicity that we are talking about. And energy independent, wherever chlorophyll is available, there is energy source. Whereas the products that the man-made economic system, we need to create a centralized energy producing system somewhere else to be able to feed the n number of products that are dispersed across the supply chains. So that energy, can each product be energy independent? Is the next lesson that we can learn from, or a challenge that we face. And nature by design has eliminated toxins. There are toxins available in that complex periodic table. Nature could have used them, but very sparingly, if at all nature uses them. But can we eliminate toxins from our products that we consume, or that are produced and consumed? And is waste a sign of inefficiency in the system? Okay, if we acknowledge that pollution or any kind of waste is a sign of inefficiency, then the resource efficiencies, the resource decoupling, and consequently the impact decoupling will think in a different way. And most importantly, another fundamental for circular economy model is today's products are tomorrow's raw material. Okay, so that's when if we consider something that ends up as waste, or instead of that, the mindset change in acknowledging that there is a resource, then it gets back into the system. So can we emulate nature? That's the biggest barrier, because in a laptop we might have 80 different elements from that, at least 50 to 80 elements from that periodic table, where nature uses 4 of them. If you have 80 elements in a particular product, then disassembly, changing them or recycling them, reusing them becomes extremely expensive, may not be possible. So can we simplify the design of our products? That is the design thinking, which is, we have to devise our design products keeping recyclability in mind, our circularity in mind. Now, for that, we need to, the first principle is material parsimony will be the first guiding principle. Now, will circular economy come to our rescue if we are talking about the future? Okay, as of today, it's acknowledged that only 9% of the global economy is circular. Okay, but circular economy, if we move slowly, and gradually on the path of circularity, then it is projected as a multi-trillion-dollar economic opportunity. Oh. And it is also, when we see an economic opportunity, it is obvious that businesses and facilitated by the right kind of government policy will try to innovate. So is circular economy the new pivot for radical innovation? Innovation in terms of product innovations, and process innovations, and business model innovations, and products as services, or various other models that are very vogue in circular economy domain. And policy, I think, is very important, which policy can play a moderating and mediating role in how firms come up with new products and circular economy models, as well as influences the behavioral changes. For example, if you just talk about the Energy Star ratings on electrical products like air conditioners or refrigerators, that has provided a single point reference for consumers to understand the environmental friendliness of a particular product. Okay, so can policy expand the basket of products where the environmental ratings in simple understandable way for common consumers are more prevalent? We need to expand the basket of that. And similarly, if you think COVID and the current pandemic is an opportunity, can the policymakers, all those bailout packages and other things that have been proposed, should they be similar to what has been proposed as the global Green New Deal when global economy went through a recession in 2008?
So Dr. Raghu, sorry to
Yes.
interrupt, we are running out of time. So if you could
I'll just give me a minute and a half, sir. I'll conclude. Okay. And sustainable public procurement is a long-awaited policy that is required, and expand the basket of products of electoral ratings, and deglobalized supply chains, which will provide the self-reliance. And if you have to move, ultimately, when the current hydrocarbons exhaust, do we have to move? I think we have to move towards the carbohydrate economy again, and towards the biomaterials age. So circular economy will set the stage for us to achieve that a long-range objective of moving towards biomaterials age. Okay, there are, I think, design principles which are all there. How to go about designing a product based on circular economy principles, right from energy efficiency, zero toxicity, easy manufacturability, longevity, and logistics. All of them, considering all of that. Coming to the, I think. If you view circular economy as the harbinger of a new world order into the future, which requires radical change, both in how businesses view this as an opportunity and gain competitive advantage by adopting circular economy, and help the society achieve both equity as well as a more desirable, more friendly environment to live in into the future. All of that requires responsible leaders and responsible leadership. As Hamel points out, a new wave of responsible leaders will have to be social systems architects, where circular economy requires collaboration, not competition. So right from SME sectors to the large players have to work together in tandem with the governments and the society. That's the biggest challenge. It's a common responsibility, and common responsibilities require a lot more effort to achieve the desired results. And With that, I thank you all for this wonderful time, and I'll stop here. Back to you, Dr. Menon.
Thank you so much, Professor Raghu. Indeed, and a very insightful talk coming from an academic background, providing the different aspects of circularity and how they can kind of make a difference to us, right from policies to practical applicability. A fantastic talk. Again, in interest of time, let's move forward to our final speaker. Our final speaker, last but definitely not the least, I should say, Dr. Mayuri. She's a lecturer with Deakin University, Australia. She's expert in strategy and management, specializing in enabling sustainable industry practices through a circular economy. She focuses on developing strategies to enable alternatives towards a circular economy, especially focusing on measurements, operationalizing, and increasing market competitiveness of alternatives. She obtained her PhD in engineering from University of Melbourne, and she's also a chartered management accountant of CIMA UK. Over to you, Dr. Mayuri.
Thank you, Dr. Ashok. Let me share my screen and get started with that. I hope you can see my screen. Yes. Yes. So, my presentation is about opportunities for a circular economy with COVID-19. And one second. Yes. So this is not news. We are living through the first economic crisis of the Anthropocene, and so at the time COVID happened, basically we run still mostly on a circular economy, mostly on a linear economy. And if we think of the aspect of circular economy, if you think of it right now at this time as a vision, a philosophy, and a set of operating principles, we can still foresee that it's the only sustainable economic model. The main reason is that it's the only way to infinitely grow in a finite world. So with COVID-19, which has impacts on the business, the environment, as well as the economy. So what we can do is to basically look at how each of these areas have been sort of impacted, and how can we make it as an opportunity with the challenges that it poses to accelerate our transition towards a circular economy. So in my presentation, I'll basically take a few examples of each and sort of briefly take you through that. So with COVID, we have obviously we got restricted movement, we got lockdowns, our supply chains got disrupted, imports reduced, and we had reduced business activity. And in general, we are moving towards a trend of deglobalization. We don't know whether this will continue or whether it's likely to sort of revive back as soon as COVID is over. But what it gives us an opportunity is to have a design shorter supply chains and to sort of increase the competitiveness of local supply sources. So we have this thing where we extract resources from one country, manufacture components in another country, assemble in another country, and then ship to another country for selling it. And for people who buy it, it's a matter of risk and benefit. So benefit definitely is better because it's a low-cost item, but on the other hand, with threats or the risk that was imposed with COVID, we can see the risk increases. So the opportunity is basically for having industrial development towards repair economy, as well as more towards a service economy. And on the other hand, for businesses, there's a need to shed excess fat. There's prepared for uncertainty and preparedness for emergencies. A lot of businesses are basically going through this phase of analyzing what is the risk response. What is the response towards the risk? And because the situation is uncertain, doing several scenario modeling on whether to expand operations or whether to sort of contract drastically. So when businesses move towards leaner business structures, and there's the opportunity to have, we would think that the the trend would shift towards having more descalable, modularized business models. So descalable means you can scale up when you want, but at the same time you can scale down without much harm to the core business proposition. And with the other trends that are emerging, of course, we have social distancing, working from home. We can see that the location dependency for work decreasing. So basically, even after COVID, there are advantages that it poses to the employee as well as the employer, and these trends would basically continue. And for businesses, with what I said before about the businesses to become lean, responsive, and flexible, if I take that as an example, if you think of businesses having large asset bases and then having higher fixed costs and high overheads, rather than having spaces which are highly customized and inclusive, there's more opportunity for having flexible spaces and low customization so that it can be shared. And when we move towards businesses trying to become leaner, we could expect that there's more codependency created where they try to basically have the fixed cost as well as the overheads reduced and operate with a model where without increasing asset base, they would try to basically attempt to get more services from others who specialize in that. And that is what creates basically advantages for having codependent and more sharing of resources. Moving to the environment part, and with COVID, of course, we could see some positive things happening with greenhouse gas emission going down for a short period of time. But on the other hand, it also poses a lot of threats. So with a lot of single-used items, including personal protective equipment, use of those increased very drastically during a very short period of time. So we already had some plastic circulating in the marine environments, and we had about 8 to 30 million added every year. And in the last year itself, the if you just take the disposable masks, it has increased very drastically, about 200 times. And historically, we know that about 75% of these single-used items go to landfill. So the problem with single-use item increase partly because we needed personal protective equipment, so demand increased. But on the other hand, when contact became a concern, we sort of did not have other alternatives. So I guess in terms of having them designed as biodegradable items, and in terms of having them diverted to the biological cycle, we were not ready basically for designing them to be biologically diverted into the biological cycle as well as for downstream processing. We also sort of saw some already existing sharing models declining temporarily, at least, as libraries, rentals, anything to do with contact. And once again, there are innovative methods to, or other new innovations that we can actually expect to happen, or there are things that we can do, but again, we are not ready in terms of when we think of the evolution of business models for the circular economy. Moving to the economies part. So for the economies, COVID basically stressed the economies quite a bit. About 150 million of people were pushed to extreme poverty within a very short period of time. And the countries basically have a lot of pressure in terms of their economic resources to provide living concessions during lockdowns, to absorb the shock of lost economic activity, to provide stimulus to the economy, especially when there's a need to sort of stop a recession happening or to revive out of a recession, to revive employment. So all of this basically drain or rather has created a lot of demands for economic resources. On the other hand, the lost some volume of the economy is lost, and then economic activities decrease. So we can't actually sort of at this time the demands on an economy is so high, but what we can expect to happen, or rather what we can wish to happen or work towards to happen, is that when the economic volumes are revived back, to increase basically the service part of the economy to a high level. So the value of the total services to the total value of the economy to sort of increase it would be, I think, would be where we could go with the performance economy, service economy, and repair economy sort of happening, picking up that volume, or rather get into that area. I would skip this point because of time. I'll go to this one. So when we think of economic strategies in a country or a nation, we kind of saw innovative local self-sustained economies emerging. So this is an example in India where it's a famous story where they had bartering started for funding education of children. So when the parents could not basically fund or pay for education, they started paying the teachers through local supply of vegetables. And that is where we kind of saw local communities getting together and trying out at desperate times what they could do, and to create sort of at micro scales small socioeconomic systems, which are actually circular economy systems. The last slide is about the challenges that it poses and the opportunities ahead. So Asia is a hub and a production center and holds access to the upstream supply chain. So when I say upstream, I mean the part before consumption. So if you take the key economic activities, production, distribution, consumption, designing products, components, and materials, and innovating distribution and business models. And that is the part where you can make the biggest difference, as well as it's a part where a proactive difference actually makes much more impact, whereas the focus is still towards waste management, which is the downstream part of it, and repurposing it back to waste. But once waste is produced, that means we are in a suboptimal mode. So that is I think what we have to get out of, and think more towards a proactive change that could have a better impact. So that's the end of my presentation, and I think with COVID, what it has done is sort of unexpected and unprecedented, but on the other hand, it also gives us an opportunity to pause and think what could be done that we did not do before, which could accelerate transition towards a circular economy. And that's what we could do at our best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, very insightful. It is really the points that you brought out in terms of certain groups even moving into barter system, the way the pandemic has pushed people into, and the need for kind of looking at newer ways to kind of address this issue. I will pause here and then check with Mrityunjay if there are any questions. I don't see any questions in the window chat. Okay, there's one question which has kind of come up, and this, I think we can direct it more to Mr. Viral. This is around, from the circular economy point of view, how prepared is India when it comes to kind of slowing down of the economy and looking at job losses? What kind of role can circular economy play in India to help revive this?
Thanks, Dr. Menon. So, I believe, while unfortunately, some of the job losses are indeed real, and that, there's a significant aspect of skilling and job creation that needs to happen. There is, through Make in India and manufacturing-led, job growth, which is hopefully going to come through and help. But I think, as we saw in Yoki's presentation, a circular economy approach does create, jobs in the short to medium term, right? So it is truly something that we expect, to actually increase the job market, right? We were talking about contactless economy and how it's a $2 to $3 trillion opportunity for us worldwide. That will also create additional job prospects, in India and elsewhere. So I believe there is potential. I know there is going to be a short-term pain, and there is a significant element of reskilling required to enable our workforce. We do have a large, young, enthusiastic workforce, and that needs to be channelized through training and a number of other programs.
Okay. Thanks a lot. There's one more question, and probably this will be the last question since we have exceeded time. I would request all the audience to kind of definitely get in touch with all the speakers who have been kind of showing. But one last question we can take, and that's more coming from, and not just India, from the different countries' point of view. What will it take to kind of create a national plastic pact? I believe this is more towards looking at from the pandemic point of view, the kind of disposable items that have got created. How do we kind of address those through probably a national plastic pack, or are there different ways of addressing it? Anybody can pick this up. Would anybody like to take a shot at this question?
Dr. Tata, do you want to go first? I have a point of view. I don't know much about the National Plastic Pact, but I have a point of view. But if you want to go first, why don't you?
I don't have much to say. Plastic is all pervasive because of its cost, as well as the ease of availability, and how many different products you can make out of it, right from the wristwatches to the spacecrafts. Plastic is everywhere, all pervasive. So it is not easy to get away with plastic unless we run out of oil, crude oil. Okay. The mother source has to dry up for us to get away with plastic. In the meanwhile, what we can at the most do is try to recycle plastic as far as possible, as many times as possible, not letting. But the microplastics and so many other things are a real problem. We don't have an immediate alternative at the scale of, say, for example, for energy, we have renewable energy. But for something that also comes from crude oil, which is also plastic, we don't have a viable alternative or at that scale, which is required to, which can make a difference. No, that's where I said that this kind of thinking is the mother source for ideas, new ways of innovation. That's where the real opportunities for business are.
Thank you so much. And Viraj, you wanted to add something?
No, I wanted to make sure if Mayuri or Yoki wanted to add any perspectives before I jump in. Okay. So my 2 cents, on plastics, I echo Dr. Tata's view that it's, they are here to stay for a while till we find bioplastics and alternate, materials. In the meanwhile, I guess, if I understand correctly, the Plastics Pact does talk about reusing, even as we try and reduce the use of plastics altogether. So to the extent that we can reuse, which I know a lot of the cities and states across the country have started to do, where they are prohibiting I think 5 microns or less, etc., or is it 25? But they are prohibiting the use of small, very thin plastics, and trying to encourage, at least plastic that is more sustainable. And I say this on a relative basis. So those are obviously steps in the right direction, but obviously we'll need to do more and minimize the leakage of microplastics into the environment through our rivers and oceans.
Thanks. And Dr. Mayuri, you were going to say something, I believe.
No, I want to say that I leave it to the Indians because I don't have much an idea about the Indian context. But of course, I mean, adding to what Viral was saying, if the context was about creating sort of a more, a pact in terms of how do we sort of have a common policy towards it, it's it's a time which is kind of changing very very rapidly, and I guess the needs are quite different as well in terms of the need for single-use plastics and all that. So I guess in terms of if there's a pact or rather if there's a policy created, I guess the first thing that we need to be ready with is having a set of alternatives which are viable. So once that is there, it is sort of economical and it sort of makes business sense, then I would say, that is the way to sort of work towards, I guess. I mean, introducing, if you think of bans or anything else, creating those set of alternatives which can create to address the current needs, and then sort of making a transition without anything drastic at a time like this. Yeah.
Great. I think this was overall a wonderful session. Thank you, each one of the speakers, for wonderful contributions that you have made. It has been absolutely enriching, and I'm sure audience will echo my opinion. With this, I would bring this session to a conclusion. Once again, thanking each one, and I think let's stay in touch, I would say.
Thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate
Thank you.
this.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.